Hi, welcome to the Lead the Future podcast. I'm Vince Molinaro, and I'm excited to have Mark Sangster, the Vice President in Industry Security Strategies at eSentire. And he is a cybersecurity evangelist and is an award-winning speaker at international conferences. He's also the author of the new book, No Safe Harbor, The Inside Truth About Cybercrime and How to Protect Your Business. In fact, Mark was so generous to send me an advanced copy of his manuscript before the book came out. And I have to tell you, when I read it, I was scared out of my mind. And I knew immediately that I needed to have Mark on this podcast. But I think this is an issue that all business leaders really need to understand. So I can't think of a better person to join us than you, Mark. So welcome to this episode, and I really appreciate you making time.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Vince. Thank you.
So let's, I think it'd be great just to understand, how did you get into this field and become kind of one of the world's leading experts in it? I'm always curious to understand, how did you get here?
Well, I think like most things, you somehow stumble and fumble into it. So, back in the day, I had delusions of med school and that didn't quite work out. And then I ended up sort of turning to technology because at the time, that was really growing, right? The kind of the dot-com days for those of us who remember that around the millennium. And since then, I've been in the IT security world for, 25 plus years. I've worked, Intel and Cisco, sort of those big names, with BlackBerry for those of us in Canada, of course. Actually worked on one of the first security devices for the U.S. government, so that was kind of an exciting, heady days. And then, ultimately over the last couple of years, I found not just a niche in the security space, but dealing with, I think, one of the biggest gaps, which is the communications gap between the sort of the technical experts who understand what's going on, and the business leaders who don't necessarily realize the sort of risks that their companies face, but aren't really sure what to do about that and how to solve that problem.
Awesome. So your book starts with a line that just jumped out at me, that said, what you don't know may not kill you, but it could destroy you. And, tell us more about what you mean by that and why you began with the book right there.
Yeah, it kind of came out swinging, right? It's like you've written that scandals follow you, right? And reputation is paramount in most businesses. In fact, most of the industries that I work with, and frankly, no amount of insurance can protect that, right? And what I found, and part of the impetus for writing the book in the first place, is that most companies don't realize they're a target. And that's because the headlines kind of focus on the big, household brands that we know, like travel companies and hotels and banks and so on. And the reality is that's the tip of the iceberg. And what's below the surface is all of those smaller, mid-sized manufacturers, healthcare facilities, law firms, and so on. They're the ones that actually take the brunt of cyber attacks, but they simply don't know that they're a target. And because of that, they don't appreciate the kind of the operational disruption they could face, the significant financial losses, as I said, earlier, damage to reputation. Later on in the book, I talk about what I call, or my other sort of, power statement, I guess, is that ignorance is not bliss. To some degree, it's negligence. And as a legal colleague of mine loves to say, the liability that you face is only limited by the sort of the creativity of the plaintiff's lawyer.
Yeah, and in the last year with, companies and organizations everywhere having to deal with a pandemic, has it made the situation worse? What's been your assessment, over the last year and a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So criminals love to jump on chaos and confusion, right? So we saw a mass shift to remote workforces. And I think that created two main pillars of risk. And the first, of course, is the dilution of security technology moving from the sort of the enterprise where it's secured by experts down into the consumer grade technology at home, right? So most people don't understand what the risks are. The vast majority of our internet routers that we are provided by our internet service provider sit with default settings. So they're not protected by passwords properly, and they're using unprotected transmissions. So that sort of shift really exposes everyone to whatever traffic and information they're transmitting. And then the other side of this is in terms of confusion, not knowing what's going on with the pandemic, should I get a vaccine or not get a vaccine? When will they be available? And so on. That's an opportunity for criminals to steal legitimate information, to pose as authority figures, and in doing so, dupe you out of whatever information is they're looking for.
So, one of the other key ideas that really jumped out at me in your writing is this idea that, we need to shift as leaders our business mindset from really seeing all of this, as an IT problem to solve, rather than, kind of an organizational risk management issue. Say more about that. And in particular, I'd love to know, how, if I'm sitting on a board, how should boards be thinking about this? If I'm in the C-suite, the CEO and the other executives, how should be thinking about that? Give me a sense of what's this shift of mindset that we need to be making.
Yeah, absolutely. So cybersecurity was really seen as an IT problem to solve, a nuisance, a budget, and frankly, in a lot of cases, an inconvenience, right? 5, 6 years ago, I used to have discussions with boards about putting, 4-digit passwords on their phones. Now, that's a fairly standard thing now, so I don't have that discussion. But now I'm looking at, legal changes, regulatory shifts, and so on, and helping them understand what their liability and their fiduciary obligations look like, and recognizing that that is now a significant vector that may impact the business, right? If that's, operational disruption, like I said, leading to financial losses, or, the reputational damage, which may take years and years to effectively, sort of dig yourself out of.
Yeah, so in addition to the reputational damage, what are the risks that I need to be paying attention to if I'm running a company like that?
Yeah, there's sort of two broad categories. The first one is the sort of the fake invoicing, or as the banks call it, fraudulent transfers of funds. So this is where you receive some kind of bill and it says, you need to pay X amount of money, or some of us have seen the low-tech versions of this where it looks like your boss has sent you an email and says you need to go buy, $500 worth of gift cards. But those things cost us billions. And I've given you some, unsophisticated example there, but there are far more sophisticated ones where they're able to infiltrate the email of a CFO, and then transact, in the millions, funds out of the company, which of course, ends up, becoming significant losses. The other sort of pillar that's become very prominent throughout the coronavirus kind of year in 2020 is ransomware. And so ransomware is that malware that effectively locks your computers, locks all your files, and you get this nasty message that says, "Pay me some amount of money in cryptocurrency to get your files back." And they've shifted from what I call transactional types of attacks, where they're locking, one or two machines and looking for $500, to massive operational disruptions. So they're taking down manufacturers. We saw in Ontario, hospitals that were shut down for days, and now they're not looking for $500. They're looking for 500,000, 5 million, and so on. And that's become actually such a significant problem facing mid-sized market companies that, in fact, south of the border, several government agencies have sort of cautiously reminded companies the sort of the risks of paying those ransoms. And I think that, do I think they're going to punish those companies for attempting to restore the business? No, but I think what they're doing is effectively exposing and admitting the sort of the magnitude of the problem that we face.
So as you look to the future, what kind of concerns you the most, and what are you hopeful for as we try to continue to deal with this legitimate business challenge?
Yeah, so when it comes to risk, everybody thinks of the bad guys, right? Because of course that's where the headlines focus.
Yeah.
But we also introduce risk. So there's the emerging technology, right? So as we connect things, as we use IoT, right, Internet of Things throughout our households, throughout our businesses, we're effectively exposing ourselves to these cyber criminals. And the engineers that operate those are very smart, very talented, but they know how to get oil out of the ground, or they know how to assemble a car, and they don't really understand the kind of the IT risks that we've all come to know and love over the last several decades. I think the other thing I'm seeing as a shift is kind of a criminal ecosystem that's developing. So they're operating like a Fortune 500 business, right? So they resell malware and ransomware, like I talked about. They do it as a service, right? Just like we would any other SaaS type business. And I think the big one that I see coming that nobody's really talking about is manipulation of enterprise value. So if you think about all of the sort of the election tampering and influence around, does the vaccine work, or, is this a way of the government putting a chip in you so they can track you and all that kind of stuff? That same sort of social media battlefield could play out to affect a market. So what would happen if I start to push that type of information to either increase the value of a company, right? And then I can buy that stock and, the stock goes up and I make a profit. Or conversely, and I think this is the one we should fear, is that I try to crash the stock where I start, spreading stories about how the company does whatever unethical behavior, or, their products, catch fire, whatever it might be, and I drive the price down. You see this to some degree at the government side where, they're beginning to push back on these things. But I think as individuals, and where I'm hopeful, is that people begin to recognize the challenges, right? So we see that this is going on and we acknowledge it, and then we become accountable, right? We have to really determine as an employee, as an individual, or as a leader, what part of this do I own, right? Where do I, where do I play in this sort of cycle?
Really describe that for me. So I'm kind of a middle manager in an organization. What would be the typical things that I would own that I can make sure that myself and my teams are doing our part to help our company, mitigate the risk here?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point, because a lot of managers, right, we are all tasked and kind of rewarded by achieving whatever goals have been set out by the organization. And so we'll look for any means and any sort of instrumental tool that's going to help us do that. So think about signing on a vendor, right? So I'm going to buy a new piece of software that helps me do my job. Well, we want to do that because that facilitates the business, but we don't think about the security risks. So before sort of inking the contract, think about what risk that might introduce, stepping back, making sure that you conduct the proper due diligence before you sort of just jump on what looks like the obvious advantage. And that means getting yourself, unfortunately, that means getting access to expertise, right? Understanding what those risks look like. And frankly, there's a lot of stories out there. There's a lot of examples that you can learn from.
And in many ways, there's, when you talk about, some of those issues around fake news and whatnot that's related to this, having just a good sense of healthy skepticism on
Yes.
what you hear, what doesn't seem to make any sense, rather than, just reading a couple of words on an email feed and all of a sudden drawing a conclusion that can lead you down a dangerous path. And I don't know if you've seen examples of that play out.
Oh, absolutely, right? So, there's sort of an expression sometimes, is to slow down to go fast, right? And it is the same thing. So have that healthy skepticism. You just don't click, right? Banks don't send you emails telling you that you need to click a link to log in to get some piece of information to make a change. So when you see these kind of things, don't click, actually open a web browser, type in the address yourself, right? Don't actually, copy what they've provided, and then go and find out if that message is there. And on a business perspective, when you receive those invoices, I would say 80% of the time, those fake invoices that are paid, it's not a cybersecurity issue. It's a financial controls issue. If you picked up the phone and said, Vince, did you really send me an invoice for X, right? Or Mark, did you do this? You'll find out, like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And suddenly you start to twig. And I think that's an important factor for companies, because as a leader, it's not about finding fault. It's about finding factors, identifying those risks and figuring out how to patch them. And you become that kind of early warning system, right? Where we start to say, wait a minute, we're all getting these sort of suspicious emails. That probably means we're actually being targeted by a criminal organization. So it's time for, some heightened vigilance.
What are the top 2 or 3 things, are the takeaways that you want every person in every company to pay attention to help their companies mitigate risk? What would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first is leadership flows from the top. Cybersecurity practices flow from the top. So define those business objectives as the leader, establish your risk priorities and your tolerances. We're willing to do this, we're not willing to accept that. And that allows the rest of the organization to align to those goals. Invest in your people, right? So awareness training and testing again is not about blame. This is about revealing the factors, because when they understand why it is that they have to have multiple passwords or why they can't just do something, they don't see it as a sort of a bureaucratic hurdle to get over. They now understand that they're protecting the business and that they're actually doing something good. They have a role to play. And the last piece is, frankly, just like we talked about a little bit with the invoices, on a corporate level, don't sign off on risk like you're clicking the T's and C's on a website. That should sound familiar.
Right.
It's the same idea, right? Is you don't just go, yeah, because this is going to be great for my business. You really have to think about what the impact may be. So, again, understand the risks, as that's the best way forward.
In all of your own leadership experiences and your expertise in this area, what advice would you have for young future leaders? Because they will be leading in a world where they're going to be inheriting this. That wasn't the case a generation ago for many other leaders. What advice would you have for young future leaders?
Yeah, in a world that's constantly technologically advancing, you're not going to know everything, and you can't, right? You need to be your subject expert in your lane, and you won't be able to do that across the pool. And there's sort of a conversation I had with my daughter when she was younger at school about not being a tattletale. And what I said to her was, it comes down to 3 things: know what's right, know what matters, and most importantly, know what's yours, right? So you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just need to be informed so you can make the right decisions. So know your role, and often being the leader means stepping back, right? We don't need heroes. We need people who know when to act and when not to act. And, really, if you can practice that and you understand what it's like to experience a cyber breach, you're in a much better position.
Well, thanks for making time in our Lead the Future podcast. I certainly encourage everyone to pick up a copy of your book. Certainly, warning as you read it, you will really confront some really critical issues, and the stories are, quite concerning. But I think this is something that we all have to come to terms with. So I really, thank you for writing the book. Wish you all the best and much success with it. And you're doing such important work at such a critical time. So thanks for joining, Mark, and sharing your wisdom with all of us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much, Vince. It's great to connect.